of all, I just wanted to mahalo again, everybody, for joining us this evening and introduce myself and my guests and share a little bit about an overview of what we're going to be talking about tonight. First of all, aloha mai kako, aloha ahiahi, o wau o maile na ehu, anoho wau makamokupuni o Molokai, ua hana ia I hono uli uli makamokupuni o ahu, me maui no ho'i malahaina. My name is Maile. I born in Waikiki, raised in Ewa, Honolulu, and Lahaina, and now Molokai is my home. For the last 16 years, we live on the far east end, where Kahale Huaka is actually centered out of, in the valley of Honolulu, the ahupua of Kumimi. I am co-founder of Kahale Huaka, an educator for the last 22 years, cultural practitioner my whole life since I was maybe 3, since I could walk and dance hula and sing and oli. And it's been my life path. And I truly believe in, building a world that we nurture our keiki to be strong, confident, compassionate individuals. So that leads us into what we'll be talking about. Tonight's roundtable is titled Kiaʻi Ikaika, or discipline that strengthens characters. At this Hanai Kiaʻi roundtable, our makua, who are sitting as our guests tonight, will reflect on experiences that allowed them to learn which approaches worked best for their ohana and keiki. We will be sharing methods of discipline that strengthen character and touch on cultural practices that play a significant role in raising strong, confident, and compassionate keiki that grow up to be awesome adults. So, like I said, none of us are real experts, I guess, at discipline, but we're all awesome makua, some of us educators, so we are very ma'a to this subject. And have been makua and around keiki for a very long time, so we're sharing our own personal stories, and hopefully it can help you as you navigate your way through being a makua or a kupuna. So let's see, I have my bios I want to share about our guests tonight. So our first guest that I'd like to introduce is Kalehua Krug. Kalehua Krug is proudly from the Waianae coast on the island of Oahu. His ohana lived in Nanakuli for generations. He currently resides in Lualualei with his 3 keiki who have been raised with Olelo Hawaii as the primary language spoken at home. He has worked as a Kaiapuni immersion teacher, a Hawaiian language teacher, education at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and transitioned to become the administrator of the Hawaiian language immersion program of the Department of Education in 2014. In 2019, Kalehua became the principal of Kawaihona o Kana'awao Public Charter School. He studies indigenous philosophy and worldview and utilizes Hawaiian cultural traditions as a mechanism to build a more sustainable future for our children and our environment. He's a practitioner of kakau, traditional Hawaiian tattooing, and is also a Hawaiian musician. Aloha mai e Kalehua.
Yeah, Kalehua.
Aloha.
Aloha, some of his many, many talents and gifts and accomplishments to our lahui, and the list goes on. So mahalo. We also have Shang Ong. Shang Ong was born and raised in Kula, Maui, and moved to Oahu when he was 18 for college. Following his parents' footsteps, he pursued a career in food and beverage. Shang managed restaurants for a restaurant group for many years until he found a love for photography. And now he and his wife, Tiff, own their own media company. Together, they have 2 daughters, Ayla, 14, and Ariana, 11. As expected, they live busy lives, creating and pursuing opportunities for their girls and themselves. Aloha, Shang. Let me get
Aloha, everybody. Thank you for having me.
Mahalo. Incredible camera work, this guy. And his awesome wahine that's behind all the magic, right? Tiffany Huali'i Kanonigo Ong. While Huali'i is a culinary graduate and early childhood educator, she is also a wife to Shang Yi and mom to Ayla 14 and Ariana 11. Her passion in life is first and foremost raising her 2 children to have strong, deep-seated roots in their cultural heritages. Plural, right? In addition to the many titles she holds, she also earned the prestige title prestigious title of Mrs. Hawaii 2020. This allowed her to serve the many communities in Hawaii, helping to bring awareness to large issues, which include homelessness and sex trafficking. She also serves families in her community in helping them malama their keiki by exposing them to the power of early education, starting with cultural, social, and emotional growth. Aloha e huali'i.
Aloha, huali'i.
Aloha, everyone. Thanks for having us. And thanks for taking the time out of your evening to be here.
Mahalo. And then our last guest is my regular, I should just call you my co-host already, yeah. But
Pretty soon.
yeah, pretty soon. I think so. Next
Pretty
month.
soon.
Hano Hano Ne'ehu. For the last 22, almost 23 years, Hano Hano Ne'ehu has been a Kiaʻi loko, a fish pond guardian, and raised as a paniolo on Molokaʻi, Hawaii. He is a caretaker of this environment in which he restores an aspect of Hawaiian aquaculture, a traditional sustainable ocean fish pond that presents other opportunities for creativity through the healing arts, sciences, and spirituality. Hano, as he is referred to, is also a community educator teaching ancient concepts in land stewardship and resource management. His ocean conservation work has allowed him to represent and be a voice for Hawaii and Indigenous Pacific Islanders. Hano is also the head Kiaʻi loko and director for Hui o Kuapa 501c3, a nonprofit that began in 1989 with the mission to restore local i'a or Hawaiian fish ponds. As a cultural practitioner, he has represented Hawaii as a delegate in the World Wilderness Congress, in Spain, a presenter for WIPSI, the World Indigenous Peoples Conference on Education, and serves as the Hawaiian Cultural Consult and Policy Builder for Ocean Conservation with Taiatea Aotearoa, a partnership with the World Wilderness Federation and the Auckland Museum. Together, Hano and Maile, me, have 3 keiki that we've raised together: Kahale, Pomona College, class of 2021, Kapili'ula, Princeton, class of 2024, and Ilikea, who, like her older siblings, attends the only Hawaiian language immersion school on their island, home Molokaʻi. And now, as an advocate, as an activist and artist for Aloha Aina, Hano and Maile, myself, translate our passions through hip hop and lyrical messages under our MC names, the Paniolo Prince and Queen Maile.
Yeah.
So that was a little intro that kind of covered me too. So
Oh,
that
babe, I
should
never
bring
knew I had that much stuff. So
I think all of you guys have some pretty impressive bios.
Wow.
So let's start with our first question. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen because I made these really cool slides and I was hoping that I could use them. Let's see. Okay, so this is the one. Okay, so I'm going to make it big. Okay, beautiful. So this is going to bring us to our first question of the night. And I was telling our guests that we use Olelo No'eau a lot to guide the way we raise our kids at home. And so this is one of my favorites, Kahana Akamakua or Kahana no Ia Keiki. If you look at the illustration, what parents do, children do. So baby Pueo is following what Mama Pueo is doing. And it is true, and it carries all the way through in all of situations and environments that the keiki will carry through what they see at home. So with that, I want you guys to share a little bit about your upbringing in regard to discipline. So I'm going to start with Hano, and then we'll go around. Yeah, are you okay with that?
yeah, I'm okay with that.
Okay, my Kaʻi. Let me stop the show.
I had to think back to growing up Paniolo. And growing up Paniolo, my mom had to relinquish her authority over me to some of my uncles in some situations that involved life or death decision making. That being said, my mom gave the green light to any of the makua that was in charge of the expedition, that if they needed to use force on her son, they could if they needed to. Mm-hmm. So the green light was always there. I thought all of my cousins had the same rules. I thought everybody had green light to, if you act up, you will get punished accordingly. And what I never realized is that some of my cousins had either favor or pity. And one of their parents wasn't down with the collective using force if needed to. I grew up getting lickings, but thinking back, I was the kind of kid that I appreciate the lickings now. Like, if I'm gonna be honest, I felt like I was a kid that went way too hard, never listened, and in some instances, I needed that pa'i from my mother because I was that kind of kid. And I was trying for a reason, being on Paniolo and being in situations where communication is hard. Sometimes slap is more effective or get out of the way. And all of these things stuck with me growing up. Like, it's okay to hit one child if necessary. And for some reason, like in some instances, depending on how the makua was feeling when we were growing up, like if uncle was mad, no get him, no do nothing, because he very fast, very easily can throw slaps. And you know, in our mind is like, if you got lickings, you deserved it. And if you got lickings, you probably would go home and get more lickings from your mother. If you was bad enough, forget the lickings. You was gonna get double lickings.
Oh,
You know what I mean?
yeah, I know what you mean.
And so in my upbringing, if one cry, all of them gonna cry.
That was the philosophy.
That was a philosophy.
Mm.
And depending on how you act, you were able and eligible to get pa'i. You know, some adults were a little bit more lenient than others, and some were really leaned into, you know, the disciplining part. But growing up, I also understood that if you were disciplined, you was easy forget love,
Mm.
was easy forget a little bit more privilege, was easy forget rewards if you enlisted. If you was good boy. If you was good boy, you know what I mean? With everybody you would get good treatment. You know?
Interesting, yeah.
And I think the last thing I like to say when I think back at the growing up part was that I learned a lot from watching my cousins get licking for what they did. And I saw what they did, saw how they got licking. Oh,
That's how you would learn.
I don't like do it. I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna do that. But seemed like growing up Paniolo, slaps was given out freely, you know. So yeah, I come from that kind of background. Slaps was given out freely. You gonna get it if you deserve it. And yeah.
Mahalo for sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah, everybody has such different stories, but I think there's a lot that we can all kind of relate to at a certain level. Yeah, for sure. So mahalo for sharing. Kalehua, you want to share a little bit about what it was like growing up and what was discipline like in your
Yeah. Hey, aloha everybody. I think the word, you know, and I wanted to just preface anything that we're talking about on here, like this word discipline is really a charged and loaded word. I think it already comes with some of the preconceived understandings of what our current society believes about it. But I always go back to this, and it's not a part of my particular upbringing or family unit, but it comes from an elder that spoke to me, and it was a different tribe. It was up in Canada. It was a long time ago, and they were just talking about having to figure out how to balance out the gravity and the weight of teaching your children the right thing, behavior wise, psychologically speaking, and keeping the child and the people safe. And one of the instances said is that when there were the need to and this is like the conundrum, I think, in the realm of discipline, especially as a matter of human evolution, is that what is it there to do? And one of the stories he said is that for them as a people is that when there were animals around, or when there were attackers around, in the olden days, that a baby could actually get many people killed. And so he weighed in that in the situation and the level of I think contemplation that needs to take place as a parent when you do think about discipline. It comes from something, and the gravity of the decision comes from something. And I think that that was a really weighted comment that he made to me on that story that he talked about. And I take that as one of my cornerstone stories that I use when I kind of think about what I've walked through in my life and what I share with my own children, because I think I had in many cases discipline the bad kind, because when you say getting lickings, Hano, I feel like I got lickings too, but I don't think I got lickings. I got licking, but I'll never get beat up. Because I think that that's the line to draw, is that I think what we're talking about for myself, what kept me in line is the potential for get lickings. I never got lickings all the time. Like this wasn't a frequent occurrence for me. I think the most frequent occurrence that took place in my life was this idea of kuleana, and I even my father, who's from Montana, my mother from again ohana from Molokai, but raised in Anakuli. That the concepts that kind of undergird how a parent decides to do this. I could see that what was important to my grandmother, because I spent a lot of time with her, was the idea of getting through to me that I was a representative of something larger than just myself. So I represented my people. I represented my family, the name of the family. I represented my grandmother. I represented my parents. I represented my school. I represented my community. That was really heavily weighed in for me when I was a child. So being accountable to a collective was huge, and it shows up in my family now. But my father was from Montana, and he was raised, he was raised pretty heavy-handedly, and so there was always a potential for that, and I knew that I had what I considered fear for that, and I saw the way that I saw my father was the same way I saw my uncles, is that if you dilly-dallying around the hole at the imu, you're gonna get run over by a pig. And you gotta be aware, you gotta be conscious, you gotta be focused, depending on the context. And so that was I think the beauty of that is that it taught me how to think. It taught me how to consider my surroundings when making these decisions for myself. And so I don't necessarily think about that as being a bad part of the discipline, even though you could be lying on your back with a chicken wire running over you, and and I think, but those are beautiful stories for me, that help to shape the way that I see even my own children, because I think that's the framework of how, for myself, I was disciplined, and the framework that is unfolded for my children is still the same one. And I believe it comes from tradition, but I also believe it comes from a really good place, that the severity sometimes comes from the gravity of that story that elder told me, and there is a gravity to raising a child, because it shapes them for the rest of their life, and that's really important.
Mahalo, Kalehua. Like I that story really hit me too. Like you really never think of it from that point of view, that it's rooted in something. So mahalo for sharing that. Tiffany, you want to talk a little bit about what discipline was like growing up for you? Okay, ulu.
Yeah, it for me it was it was more of I feel like it was more fear than anything else. When it came to discipline, my mom would always defer it to my dad. And because he was the more he's the more fiery one between the two. But thinking about it, growing up, when he was growing up, his mom and dad were divorced, and his dad he was abused. My dad was abused. They all, I think, how many brothers? I think there's 5 brothers and 1 sister. And so my dad was always trying to get the attention of his dad, and oftentimes maybe he would act out to get the kind of negative attention, and he would get lickings for it. Like, not lickings, but he would get abused in, just various stories of, smashing his head into soup when he wasn't eating his food, kind of thing. But thinking about it, how he raised us, he never wanted to, he never abused us. He definitely instilled that kind of fiery fear through discipline. I never thought that I never thought I was abused, but I definitely, like Hano said, there are times where he felt like the lickings was something that needed to happen for it to get through. And so I think that how he was raised and how my mom was raised, it was very different, and they it filtered through that to me. There wasn't so much of a cultural influence. I think it was more of a social kind of upbringing. My dad grew up in Merite housing, Kahuku, Nanakuli. So he was in gangs. He was around that kind of crowd. And so it was, I guess, like the old school, you get lickings, you get beaten. And that's what, I don't want to say it happened to us. I mean, like I said, we never got beaten, but to a certain extent, it was pretty freaky, to have that kind of physical discipline instilled in you. But as a parent now, I see how effective and ineffective it can be. And so it's nice to be able to see the growth when you're not as aggressive. Like my parents or my dad was. And my dad is the sweetest guy. He's like, I hope I'm not painting him out to be a tyrant, but he's so nice, and he's so calm and gentle now. Probably because he's like 70, but he's definitely very loving. But through parenting us, it's not easy. A lot of times our emotions get the best of us, and you parent based off what you know. So
Mahalo, Tiff. Mahalo nui. Your story sounds similar to my upbringing too. It's like you don't know if it's like lickings, or you don't know, but internally, like the fear is there. Like there's and it's with daddy. Because mommy would always prefer.
Oh, it was the line, and I still hear it to this very day. You wait till your dad gets home. You wait till your dad hears about this.
Yeah.
And then I would in a sense that like my stomach would get into knots, and then when that 5:30, 5 o'clock hits, you're like fearing for your life. You're trying to take a shower and get out of Dodge.
Zero tolerance in my house for talking back, like zero tolerance. So it was pretty rigid in my home too. Sounds similar. But Shang, I would love to hear a little bit about your growing up, Do you happen to have like
I was
there,
trying to turn on. I'm sorry about the
there
lighting
you
in here.
are.
Hold on one second. I'm
Okay.
in the car. Hold
Perfect.
on.
It works.
Does that help?
Perfect.
But yeah, I can vouch for Tiff's dad. He's a very lovable man. Okay, and this coming from the son-in-law. So, but I think as far as discipline and upbringing goes, for me, I came from a pretty unique dynamic. You know, I lived with my mom's parents as well as my parents, of course, and um, I think my grandfather was the heavy one. You know, he was the one that would be very quick tempered. Of course, he was also very quick to love, but he's the one that probably did the spanking, if anything. I remember he had like this feather duster that he would use to discipline us with, and it was just kind of like, what do you call it, like a slip. You know, he would just spank us with it. You know, and at the end, it was all afraid. We were afraid of it. It didn't come out all too often, but my parents, I honestly can't remember the any time that my parents ever like spanked us. I think that their style of discipline was more about maybe guilting us, you know, me and my sister, you know, trying to make us feel that guilt about maybe disappointing them or feeling bad. And I don't know if that's Chinese culture. We came up from a very progressive upbringing in the sense my parents are from my mom's from Malaysia, my dad's from Singapore, and I think my dad, his upbringing with his relationship with his father was very career driven, you know, and then my mother, she was very free spirited, you know, and then so when they came here, they also had a very busy life running a restaurant, so they relied on, you know, my mom's parents to kind of do the disciplining at home and when they weren't home, you know, and then of course when we got older, my parents, they actually divorced, and so when that happened, the discipline did kind of change a bit too, you know, because you're now balancing two different households. It's hard to ground people, and they're also pursuing their own happiness in a sense, you know, through a divorce. You know, they're trying to refine themselves, find out what can be happy. And so when that happens, not to say that they ignored us or whatever it is, but I think that they, you know, maybe we're a little bit more lenient with discipline. You know, they of course understood the effect of a divorce, so they tried to make things a little easier on us. So I think that's kind of the dynamic that happened in my household. It wasn't so much physical. Of course, it was there, and you are afraid of it. But I think it really was more about the feeling of the guilt. You know, you don't want to. They want us to feel like if we did something wrong, we're letting them down. And I think that was the form of discipline that they kind of chose to go with, as opposed to something more physical with us.
Mahalo, Shane.
Babe,
Yeah.
I get one thing for ad. Of all of the situations I've heard, in my house, my mom was the heavy-handed one. My dad never laid a hand on us. My mom did.
Mm-hmm. And what about when, like, a lot of your life was growing up with your grandparents?
Yeah.
What was that like? The dynamic between Papa and Grandma?
In the Molokai Hawaiian households, we see grandparents as, or at least the grandparents or our parents, they're really bad disciplinaries.
We're gonna get to that question later, actually.
So that's all I gotta say for now. You know what I mean? There's no discipline action coming
No,
from
I love
you know,
Noise comment. Her mom was the scary one too. My grandma was the scary one.
yeah, my mom was a banger.
Yeah, my grandma was 5 feet. That's so funny. Oh, such good. You know, you can laugh about it now, but at the time it was scary.
I love her for licking for you know, giving me what I deserve.
Oh man, we turned out
I
okay.
appreciate that.
We turned out okay. So I'm gonna go into my next question. We're kind of just like building upon question. And let me get into my screen here. So my next question is inspired by the Olalo no Iao. Mohalai ka wai ka mako na pua. Unfolded by the water are the faces of the flowers. And it can be interpreted in many different ways, but one way is that when we say like water nurtures a flower to grow, so do nice, kind words and words that are, you know, can build really character in a child, a pua. right, is way more effective than the other approaches we've been kind of joking about and talking about. But what are some disciplinary practices that you experienced as a child that you still use? So a lot of times, like in these stories, we talked about, well, you all kind of talked about the positive too, but it was kind of like a lot of fear, you know. But was there some things that you really pulled out that you still carry on to the till this day? I think I want to start with Kalehua this time. Hikino?
Mhm. Yeah, I don't know. I think the idea of what Shang was talking about is just developing a sense of responsibility. Because I think a part of what I do with my children, because I feel like what you guys are saying, the females in my family were the disciplinarians. My father was maybe a closer, but I think he had a little bit of fear behind that too, that if he didn't close well, that he was going to get in trouble. So yeah, I think me and him are probably in the same boat. Um, but as far as what I think, and I'll be honest with you, is that in child psychology, I think that we have a myriad of emotions and skills that development allows us, and I think fear is naturally one of them. I don't shy away from utilizing something. I mean, you can tell a lot of our traditional stories or indigenous stories in general have like these fantastical creatures that develop these fears that don't go in the water because there's a gigantic shark named, and it really does feed off of that, because and fully understanding that as cognition increases in a human, those stories don't really work anymore unless you don't progress from that point in your own development. But I think that while for myself, building a sense of honestly, like a connectivity to our family stories, a connectivity to some of the fantastic things that happened. Like my grandmother, we have a name as tied to a fish in our family, and I used to tell stories about that fish, that we are from that fish, and I would take the kids down to the reef and show them the fish and talk about the fish, and I get tattoos on my body from the fish, and you focus on these naturally occurring themes, I think, that show up outside of just our family or just them as a child, and you connect them and ground them to those thematically to that taxonomy of spirit. And I honestly believe that that's what they still lean on, that to this day. That there were times I had a spot, and I'm confessing right here, but my children had a spot on their ribs that I they barely had to do anything, because I just look at them and, hey, come on, put my hand down right on the skin underneath the rib, not even got the kind, and just and then whoop, straighten right up, but I'll tell you that what grounded that is that aside from discipline, we used to use martial arts techniques with them, and they would learn, like I would teach them how to defend themselves from a young age. And I would do like these it's a type of lomi that I would call hopakolea, but kind of squeeze them deeper to get to harden the bone and to get the skin used to pain. And so it really, like, they knew that there was a strength and a pain that comes with physicality. And so they avoided it, not because they got beaten up or anything, but they avoided it because they knew it was present. And so a part of the training that I used with my own children was just kind of slapping the thighs from when they were young, and they all remember. They laugh about it now because we don't do that anymore. We can train and go at it, but kind of slapping the skin, and then training and telling them that this is a part of developing your strength, your internal strength, and allowing them to experience physicality, and then talking to them about the association to responsibility to our family makua, our family forms, our family essence. And I'm a tattooist too, so I would kind of lay it on them, is that when come time to represent what our family does, you know, you have to be strong, and that in that event, and that the you know the tattoo came early for my children in life, for the girls when they hit menstruation, and for the boys, for Kaula, when he started actually stretching and being a part of the tattooing experience, that they had to face this physical pain. And so for us, I don't shy away as a father from addressing that, because I think if you understand, I mean, you know, we're humans and we have nerves, and so pain is there. If you can understand it, get to know it better, kind of control it and push it away, then you can really focus in on the mental, spiritual, and emotional pain that comes with life. And I think that overcoming the physical pain in those moments, and I think why I'm saying this is because of all of those experiences, I think they knew what could have happened, and they avoided it. You know, they avoided what could have been, because they experienced the potential outside of getting scoldings, you know. And so for the most part, talking through connection to family responsibility, and then just looking at the, you know, I mean, I knew that too, but somebody look at you the wrong way, you just stop, because you know the potential.
My kailoa. So wow, so I can see like that really, like you used, you know, what you had grown up with, and evolve that through, like, you know, all of these experiences that you experienced through your adulthood. Yeah, and putting all of those things together to start these really, I really enjoyed like those ideas that you shared. I really enjoyed those ideas that you've used on your keiki. And I
It's from the
think,
kupuna, that's not mine.
yeah, I love that. I would love to talk more about it another time, you know. But yeah, mahalo for that. You think, Shang, do you want to answer that one? Like, are there some practices that you still bring into your ohana today?
Yeah, I know, you know, when I was speaking about the guilt and all that kind of stuff, and I don't really mean it in a negative sense where it was manipulative to make me always want to please my parents. I mean, that was part of it, but I think now with our kids, it's about instilling that, like Kalehua said, is the responsibility, you know, to understand that when you mess up, sometimes you're going to let somebody down, you know. And I think that that same feeling of dropping the ball should be present in our kids, you know. I think that's something that that I still instill in my kids, you know. It's about them themselves knowing who's accountable for what, and knowing when they've made a mistake and how they should feel about it, you know, because there's a responsibility there for the village, you know. And sometimes that village is just our household. And, you know, I mean, talking about, you know, I think I can relate to Kalehua's dad, where, you know, Tiff is actually the hammer in our family, you know, but I'm maybe considered, she looks at me to be the closer, you know. I got to back her up, and and of course we always have to come in with a unified front. But I think for me, growing up with that sense of responsibility of never wanting to let my parents down, I think that's something I do want to instill into my kids. I'll tell you a story, because when I was, I think like 18 or 19, I was down in Waiuhu, and we were having like a party at my friend's house. But then the next day, it was New Year's Day, and my mom had said, "Okay, you need to come home and you need to help me like do something." She had owned like an import export business, and I was out partying really late that night. But I told my mom that I would be there, and I knew that I didn't want to let her down. So that night, all my friends, we were drinking. We were underage, but they were drinking, so I didn't want to ask them to drive. So I actually walked all the way from Waiuhu all the way up to Kula in one night, just so that I could make sure I could be home with my mom. Yeah, it's a true story. It was the crazy pitch black, walked all the way from Waihu all the way to Kula, just so that I could make sure I could be there for my mom, to not let her down. And I think, you know, I think I want my kids to have that same kind of work ethic, or that same kind of responsibility, that when you say you're going to do something, you better do it, because, you know, you don't want to feel like you let somebody down, is basically what it was.
Yeah, the really strong connection with both of your stories, where it comes back to the ohana, right? The reflection of the ohana, the mo'okuauhau, and you're not just your own self, you're standing there representing everyone else too, right?
Yep.
If you mess up, we all going down with you, right? So I love that. I love that message. So that would take us to Huali'i. Huali'i, you want to add to that?
Hold on. One moment. Oh, sorry, somebody walked in. Yeah, that's unbelievable, right? I mean, he walked. They don't live that far up, so don't feel so bad for him. But it's far. You know, going into it, I definitely brought a few things in to my ohana. And like, you know, like I said before, you bring in what you know, right? I started off with giving my kids lickings, and Isla, you know, she was she's like the older one is always kind of the experiment child. But she, you know, I realized that she never responded to getting lickings. It didn't, it didn't, you know, instill that kind of fear, or it didn't show that it instilled that kind of fear in her. Then I really had to think about, you know, now am I abusing my kid? What am I doing to her? Is there something else going on that she's not reacting, or she's not understanding? So I stopped. I stopped. She was really, I mean, she was younger when I stopped. And what I did take from growing up, my parents, we had a lot of like family meetings. You know, we always sat down and we talked about what the issue was at hand, whether it was as a family, as a unit, or one-on-one with each kid. But we till this day, I mean, just till a few hours ago, we were talking to Isla, you know, talking to her and helping her to understand her choices, how it affects other people, how it's going to affect her in the future, how, you know, how regretting making a choice right now, what it's gonna be like in the future. So there are definitely a lot of things that we practice today as parents in our household. You know, and it also takes a village. It takes other people to help instill certain things with our kids that we had. You know, we had mentors talking to us about what we needed to do and what was expected of us. If we, you know, for me it was hula. If I didn't make grades, I wasn't competing. I wasn't going on the trip. And I had Auntie Mapu, you know, and Uncle Kihe talk to us, and gosh, like, they're scary, you know, they're intimidating. And so, you know, like I didn't want to let them down. I didn't want to let my hula sisters down. So realizing, you know, going back to Isla and Ariana, realizing that kind of physical discipline is not always, you know, it's not always effective. Trying to figure out how to get through to them, and it was tricky. And I can't say that because it works for my kids, it's going to work for everyone else's kids, because what works for Isla doesn't work for Ari, and what works for Ari doesn't work for Isla. So that's what makes kids unique, like all of us, you know, all of us unique. But understanding the emotional effect that yelling, screaming, lickings, belts, rice paddles, slippers, all of that, what that did to me, it just led me to be fearful of fearful of my, of course, my dad, of being able to just even open up and talk to my parents about what I want to do, in fear, like, because I was afraid that if I said I wanted to do something, they were going to yell at me for it. They were going to tell me that, they were going to tell me everything I didn't want to hear. So what I wanted for my kids was for them to be able to open up, to talk to me, to trust me. And one of the things that I always tell them is that, first and foremost, I'm your mom. I'm your mom. I'm not your friend. I'm your friend after. So, I'm so sorry. Can you hear it? Can you guys hear? There's drumming. So I mean, anyway, so I want to be able to have them open up and come to us, and not fear the, the unknown. So I hope I'm doing something good.
Sounds like it, Mama. We live and we learn. So I guess that brings us to our last, guest to answer this question. What are some practices that you brought with you all the way till today?
I talked about this earlier in a earlier workshop we had about my Uncle Clifford. He was this master paniolo that we all learned from, and he taught us how to rope and ride. And in our family, kids and animals were like interchangeable. How you treated the animal is the same way you treat the kid. The attention you give towards the animal and the kid, you can reap benefits and good results. If you abuse the animal or the kid, you're gonna get one really uninterested, no care, no try hard, nothing, kid and animal.
Scared.
Right. I mean, just an injured being.
Yeah.
And so in our family, you would check how everybody's horse was by giving them to each other. Right? I will give my horse to my cousin gonna give his horse to our other cousin. Huh?
No, that's my next question. That's perfect.
And then he gonna give them to our other cousin. And then when we switch, it's about keeping them honest.
Yeah.
Because you get bad habits that they pick up. And my point of this story with my Uncle Clifford is we realized to love without favor or pity. Like if you can take your bias out, you can see clear on what the boundaries is, the rules is, the potential of the child, and what need for be said and done. When you get bias, it's you're not seeing clearly, So sometimes that not seeing clearly make you make either dumb decisions, wrong decisions. You celebrate maybe too much, maybe you punish too harshly. So it was about taking that pity and that favor out of it, and like no more favorites, just everybody the same. And that's what I was saying. Like my uncle was like, what we learned is like, oh, I love all of you, and none of you is my favorites, but I love all of you. And when you can do that, it makes everything more easy for you as the disciplinary. If you fail and you even with your treatment across the board. So what I wanted to close it is what I brought into my family from the old school. It is one story I told him earlier too. My mom, she put me on a horse. I'm gonna run barrels, but I was a fat kid, so I had hard time staying on the saddle. I would get always off balance. So we'd barrel race, and you would have to run around on barrel, run around on another barrel, run around the last barrel, and then come home full blast. First barrel, I was leaning. Second barrel, I was leaning. Third barrel, down in the front of a whole arena full of people. Everybody, oh! And then my mom yelling, stand up, boy, stand up. You get him, boy, stand up. Nobody coming for come save me. Nobody coming for help. But the belief that my mother had in me, and the idea that she said, you got to learn, I cannot fight all your battles. You're gonna have to learn how to fight your own battles. You're gonna have to learn how to stand up. So I had this one time I was coaching basketball, and my bebe was small, and they was running back and forth. They came back from one drill. Her feet got tangled, and she would fall down on top of the court. Oh, and she was down. Ah. And I was like, "Come on, ba, you get him. You can stand up. You got this." And you're like, ah. And then, oh, she get up real slow, you know. But I thought that what my mom did for me and giving that to my girl and like saying, "Ba, you get this. You gonna fall on, but you get them. Come on, stand up, stand up. Gonna be okay. Try again, go again." You know, so that was one example I thought, you know, I brought from the old into now into our family.
Oh, mahalo. You have some of the best stories to share. Okay, I'm going to share our next question. And a lot of you guys kind of touched on it already. So, you know, don't feel like you have to go super deep into it if you've already touched on it, because you guys, oh man, this always happens. Like the questions kind of like intertwine. So let me, you know, because that's how we just talk story. Okay, so he wa'a he moku he wa'a. Canoe is an island is a canoe. And this can be interpreted in many different ways, but in this sense, I want you to think about who is in your wa'a, who is helping to raise your keiki. So the question is, who shares in the disciplining of keiki in your ohana? And we could also use this time to touch on co-parenting, you know, being step parents, growing up with step parents maybe, or like being raised by grandma and grandpa part-time, or so bring in the old, bring in the new, but let's talk about shared discipline and co-parenting. So I guess we can start with, we just had Huali. So I'll start with Shane.
Okay, thank you. I think, you know, my mom lives on Maui, and my dad actually lives back in Malaysia. You know, but then Tiff's parents live on this island. So I think as far as kind of how we all share in the disciplinary and raising these kids, I think, you know, Tiff's parents, not to say they have more of an influence, but I guess in the sense where they can see them more frequently. You know, maybe they have that maybe more opportunity to discipline than my mom would, or my dad would, for that matter. You know, whenever my mom or my dad see them, they just want to love them. You know, because they really don't get to see them all too as much as they'd like to. Anyways, where was I going with that? But I
Are there
think,
certain, like, are there certain agreements that you, or talks that you have with your parent? You know, either huali'i or like Shang, like when the kids are with them, like this is how we do it at home. Like how do those conversations happen? Where you don't
yeah,
want to have to, like, you know, because we would have to, just real quick, I want to touch on like our personal experience. Like they would go visit the in-laws on Maui, and then I felt like I would have to go through a period of detoxing.
yeah,
Detoxing from sugar, detoxing from like having
yeah.
no time, detoxing from too much TV. So do you have those conversations? What happens with that?
I won't speak for Tiff, but because I know she's gonna want to touch on this, but I do know that, you know, Tiff has a very good relationship with her parents where she can tell her exactly, you know, and I think that the way we want our kids' health and their well-being might be different from what will happen when they go to grandparents, because they're grandparents, you know. When you're a grandparent, you just want to spoil the kid rotten, you know. Just give them everything, and no holds barred, and then give them back to the parent when they're done. But anyways, I'll let Tiff kind of touch more on that, because I think my mom, she has very high standards for health, so she doesn't give them a bunch of sugar and things like that. And you know, I'm not worried about my mom having a different tactic as far as discipline goes, because, you know, not that I'm against physical discipline. Like I said, like I don't think it's a bad thing at all. I think some kids really need it, but I think some kids don't, and I think our kids might be those cases where they don't need it. So I don't necessarily have to have that conversation with my mom. I think though, you know, within our household, oh well, let me tell you, going back, because my parents were divorced, and then you know, my mom did find a new partner. So I did grow up in a home where you know, there was a stepdad involved and things like that. But his approach was very hands off. You know, it wasn't so much where I'm gonna help raise your kid. You know, he was just kind of like, you know what, I'm here, and I'll let you do your thing. My mom, meaning And so I didn't really get a lot of influence as far as how he might have been disciplined. I know that he actually grew up in a very abusive household when he was younger, so I think that maybe he just, sometimes you either embrace that or sometimes you're just like, I'm going to be the exact opposite. So maybe I think that's what it was for him. So anyways, but I think growing up in that environment where my parents were divorced and maybe feeling like there wasn't a unified front as far as discipline goes, I think that's something that I told myself, that with my kids, we both want to be very involved. We both want to have the same frame of mind and kind of go in it together, and I think that's where Tiff and I kind of do well together, where, when we're having conversations with our kids or we're having the lectures or things like that, we are very unified as far as what the message is supposed to be. So I'm not sure if that answered the question. I hope it did. But
It did. Everyone's
okay.
gonna have a different story. Mahalo
Yeah.
for sure. I think with that would be really good to bring Tiffin and kind of like finish the rest of that mo'olelo.
Going back to my parents, in the beginning, it was like, Dad, stop buying bags of candy for the
McDonald's.
kids. It was, I would much have rather had McDonald's, but I'm very open with them in letting them know what we're doing at home. In the beginning, it was hard. It was really hard because Hina was the first grandkid. That's my older niece, my brother's daughter, and then eight years later came Isla. So they had Hina, and they 8 years later comes Isla, and then Isla gets to sleep over, and they're excited to sugar them up and spoil them and get to do all the grandma grandpa kind of things. But it got to a point where I had to tell them, like, Dad, you can't do that. What you're doing, like Maile, you talked about having to detox after they came back from Maui. Same thing with us. I had to have that conversation with my dad, and I even went as far as telling him that if you're not going to support me on this, they can't sleep over your house. And it really hit my dad in the gut, and even my mom, to hear that. And I said, you really don't understand how hard it is for me, because when Sheng was working in food and beverage, he was working at night. That was the busiest time, and he was the general manager for the restaurant, so he was there at the busiest time. And so I was left, I was with the kids by myself. I did all the evening things, and so when I would receive them back from my parents, it was like a nightmare for me. So having that open, that hard kind of discussions with my parents was really it was really difficult, but it was necessary. And they over time, they understood where I was coming from. So now when I'm having a hard time, or when Sheng and I are having a hard time with the girls, I'll ask my parents, like, hey, can you help talk to them, for me? Because they just look at me, and we've probably all experienced this at one point in time, where our kids don't think that we're like serious, or we don't know anything about anything. But if Tutu or Papa or Auntie or Uncle have that conversation, they're like, oh, okay, now I get it. So we've had to bring them in to a lot of times to have discussions.
In fact, sorry to interrupt you, babe, but you brought up Hina, and Hina is their older cousin, who Isla like idolizes, and Hina and Isla and Ariana does too. But I think she also plays a large part in kind of helping, set an influence. And sometimes we'll ask her to kind of have conversations with Isla to kind of help drive home a point that maybe we can't get through because she's not, open to listening to us, but Hina will help with that, or your brother or something like that. So yeah, it's, we talk about your parents, but also Hina actually plays a big part in that as well, huh?
Yeah, she does, because a lot of times Hina will ask me, do you want me to talk to her about it? And she understands, because they're 8 years apart, and that's the closest to, they're the closest in age, and the trust factor is there. So it's it really does, like, when they say it takes a village, it takes an entire village, even straight, just the indirect, not necessarily discipline, but teaching, the things that you two, like, actually everybody on this panel, whether you know it or not, Kalehua, your influence, your guys' influence on my kids is great, and a lot of times I tell them, you talked about what, in your household, there's no talking back, right, Maile? There's no such thing as talking back. And I think this generation is a little bit different. And Ayla and Ari will say something, and they don't realize who's listening. And even though dad's upstairs, he'll yell down from upstairs, "Hey, watch it." And they stop. And and then I'll come in and I'll say, would you have talked like that to auntie so and so, or papa, or puna, or blah blah blah, or your kumu at school? And every single time they would say no. And I said, okay, so why am I different? And so just having, instead of yelling, it's a stern. I speak very sternly, but it's the influence of everyone around us really helps to teach them integrity about what they're doing, how they're acting, what they're saying to one another.
Mahalo. Yes. Sounds a lot like our ohana too. So I want to take it to Kalehua. Kalehua. Who's in your va'a?
That, I mean, I'm over here thinking about that, because that was one of the most difficult things with how we raised the kids. We didn't have a really big va'a. And what that means, for the folks out there that don't know, but when me and the kids' mom no longer together, but the story is one that includes a long history and many stories of that time frame. And we kind of made this commitment, because I was coming in as the language speaker while she was hapai with our oldest, Kamale. And we made that commitment through. And for me, I always bring in, because at that moment in time, it was people like Noea Warner, Anakala Eddie Ka'anana, and throughout those times, Keone Nunez, who taught me tattooing, Baba Yim, principal at Anuenue right now, a really good friend of mine during those moments in time, Kiaʻi Smith, and these were Hawaiian language speakers. And it took a little while for me to learn, because I was young, and I made a commitment to, I did a lot of studying, I over intellectualized. I think you can probably hear that. And it showed up negatively for the first year or two, because Kamali didn't really have a relationship to some of the family members, like her ohana. I mean, everybody loved her. I mean, there was a village waiting, but because of what we had committed to language-wise, we kind of put her in a bubble, because I didn't know any better. And realistically, I was getting guidance from some of the people that I just named, and they said, yeah, for a little while, you got to keep her away from English, because English is so strong, if you want to do what are you saying you want to do. And so we did that. And mom, the kids' mom didn't know Hawaiian at the time, so she went through like a boot camp Hawaiian language crash course with me in the house, and wasn't easy on us. It wasn't easy financially, doing what we did, because over time then we homeschooled the 3 kids in Ola, Hawaii. And so it took a lot out of us as people, it took a lot out of us financially. And I think in that scheme of discipline and the relationships, it took a lot out of us there too. That we kind of had to, by the time Kaula, our son, was born, that was 2 years later, kind of made this realization that they even though we're hitting the Olelo hard, we're missing the cultural side, and the cultural side being that they have to know their ohana, like they have to know their family, and they have to know their kupuna, and they really didn't at that time. And I say that, with all transparency, and it was a lesson learned, and so we tried to rebuild and bring the kupuna into some of the Olelo Hawaii classes, because by that time, Kamale and Kaula, moving through the next 2 years of, they were heavy talkers, a lot of ideas, a lot of questions, really inquisitive and all of it, and had a lot to talk through, but nobody to understand what they were saying in the family. And everybody kept looking over to me like I had to be a translator, and we're like, that's she said way too much for me to translate, and little kids, right? And so in that scheme, nobody disciplined, it all really fell back on us. But I wanted to go back to what Hana was talking about, because I think what was and even till today, what's prevalent in the way that I was raised, and it sounds like in that story, get up, boy, get up. That there is this real deep-seated aloha that comes with the parenting styles here. And I think that sometimes being strict is aloha. And sometimes, if you got using any method, if the intention is to course correct and behave and modify behavior for the child, for the best of the child, that if you're willing to do anything, even if you gotta spank when you don't like spank, because that's not you. But there are people in my ohana don't like do that. It's really about this idea of child watching and then doing what the child needs. And the child learns that, holy cow, they're stepping out of their norm to help me. They're going above and beyond to help me. And I think that that eventuated in this ability to access what success feels like, and love feels like, and achievement feels like, and strength and power feels like, because there were times in my life I felt like I was invincible. I still, to a certain degree, but I'm old and my joints are screaming at me, no, you're not invincible, buddy. But there are times in my life, and I really feel like that was a big part of that interaction with the children, is to build empowerment within them, and not empowerment to because I think what we're talking about earlier, was said earlier, and I'm not saying that's what was going on, but the idea of sassing to sass versus the idea of challenging for deeper thought and more critical discourse is two different things. Because for me, I encourage you. What the thing is, and I always tell the kids, hey, you can say anything you want, you can ask any questions you want, but watch out, because you may come in with all the confidence in the world, but if you never do your research, if you're not prepared, if you never study the words and the ideas that go through the logic that you're trying to build as you build your case, you gotta watch out, because you might sound like a spoiled little brat sometimes, because you're trying to plead your case with no more information. And so those are the challenging, not a problem until today. And I love it, in the Hale Mane, the kids push back, and I love it, but you got to push back with weight, with power. You got to push back with intellect, and you cannot push back with nothing, because you're gonna get called out on it. You get teased, because teasing is a part of it too. And I think that's where pointing back to just the va'a. I know that they love their ohana. I know that they respect folks for their placement in the the evolution of where we've come, but we're definitely very, very much so different than the other members of the family. And that there is definitely, when we go to family gatherings, there's a big disconnect, because we kind of gotta just be quiet and not be ourselves, and sit down, spend time, feel the mana, and then leave. Because if we start talking about what we believe in, we're going to rob people the hard way, and we're going to rub them in the wrong way. We get one va'a, and the family is big, but they're definitely in a different cognitive space than us, and that affected the way that we interacted disciplinary wise, and even with, how we talk.
Yeah. I think we can relate to that. To
You
see
get them
that.
off mute.
Yeah. Why don't you tag team off of that?
Well, my brother, that was said beautifully, amazingly. Like everything you said, I wanted to say, but it was just beautifully put. Okay, what I was going to say was that our story sounds very similar to yours, because although I was blessed to have this island as a mama, all of the families know me, love me on this island, help raise me. When I received my family, I was fighting for ohana. And so most of my ohana was on the other side. So like it or not, I created this division between where I was standing, where my rest of my family was standing. And now I bring it in with new family with kids, 7 and 3. And now how we feel, what we like for our kids, no match up, no line up with the throw them in a bunch category. Like how I was raised, just throw them in a bunch. They all cowboys. They all gonna learn the same. They all, you know what I mean? This and that. Throw them in a bunch. I couldn't do that because of the commitment that we made. And then I made to the aina. And so I know that I was raised by one village. In our situation, I had to take that village and become the whole village.
Yeah, boom.
I had to become the aunties that gave me aloha. I had to become the uncles that was straight up with me, that would broke my ass if I needed to. I had to become all of this because I couldn't give my kids away now. Just because of the fundamental and the foundational things that we wanted. We invested in. Yeah. And
about like talking about the detoxing or reprogramming,
right.
Just when they went to Maui. So it's like it can happen so quickly.
The love that for my family that was on that side at that time, I never lost that.
Yep.
I cannot allow my kids, because of the commitment that we made, the future we envision, we gotta invest.
So we basically created, we had many conversations about the type of world that we wanted to offer our keiki, from, home, and as it goes out to community in the world and so forth. And so like how he's saying, it was kind of a controlled environment, just like how you were saying, like, and a lot of people ask, like, how did you raise your kids to be so kind and so like helpful and like, loving to learn and all these things, or like musical or artistic, and honestly it came down to that we created our own world at home. And people are like, oh, long, we never even know you're still on the island, and part of that is really part of the plan. Not that we want to just be strangers to everybody, not that we don't love the ohana, but we can see how it's greatly benefited our happiness and the ability for our keiki to choose their futures, to not just say have their future handed to them, creating tight routines, being strict with a lot of love. And he used to think I was crazy. He'd be like, you answer every question they ask. And I'm like, yeah, because if I don't, who going?
What?
Every question.
And when you speaking like this, I think that because as I reflect, as they're old, that's one of the things that I actually observe that's missing, is that when they don't know how to engage with new love, like new aloha, like they're so tight that when anything new comes in, there's always like there's this prickly gate that is set up.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
because I don't and I'm not, I mean, you guys know me, but I'm not I think I'm very emotional, but I'm also very intense. And the intensity that showed up for them all the time. And so they all get one inner intensity that's heavy. And I say that as a good thing and a potential negative, because I think that they just it seems that they're not trusting of relationships, and that they're not trusting of like somebody has to kind of prove their worth before they enter the circle. And I don't know how that happened. I don't know how I did that. I don't know what happened in the circle, or but I think that the idea that, because they always talk about that, somebody called them a pack of wolves, and I laugh at that, but I also know that there's a truth to that, there's teeth there, and there's a warrior spirit there. But what I'm focusing on right now is kind of that softer, more tender aspect of allowing the wall of the cell to allow new air, new life to enter it, and not be so rigid and hard on the emotional side. And I think I missed that in the parenting phases early on.
Oh, mahalo for sharing. We actually realized that once the kids started getting a little older, all around 11 or 12, then we were like, okay, maybe they're old enough to send off to auntie or uncle. So we go send them to Noe for the summer. You know what I mean? Because then we were like, okay, if anyone else can be in our va'a, these kids are old enough. So we would start sending them out. And we did it for that reason, because we started to notice that they like socially were struggling, So we said, oh, we go send them to who we trust. So they're part of our va'a for sure.
What I wanted, there's a couple points I wanted to make before we move on, was we took a risk trusting our kids that whatever Molokai High School and Molokai lack in preparation for their future, mommy and daddy gonna take care of.
Yeah.
We're gonna invest.
Yeah.
Yep.
What we never do, and part of it was because of one of my aunties who said, why you not just send them to commandment schools? They're too young for go commandment schools.
And we like discipline them. We want them to be able to dive in the ocean after school if they like, all those kind of things.
If I never have time for invest in my kids, if I was too busy making way too much money and no can come home, then maybe I would consider sending my kid to an environment like that. But if I get the time, I get the energy, and I get the ike, then why are I going to send them away?
Off
In
island,
fact,
yeah.
we'll go, whatever our kids interested in, we'll go offer them to their cousins, to the community, and we'll go help,
Mhm.
if they like do what our kids like doing, we can help,
So we're almost at the end, but I really wanted to touch on this question, because I thought it was really important, as as educators, as parents. How do you discipline keiki that aren't your children? And I use this olelo no iao, ho'okahileo wale no he lava or ua lava. And I use that in my classroom. So I'll tell the kids, ho'okahileo wale no, and then they echo ua lava. One voice is enough. So I'm always disciplining keiki that aren't my actual biological keiki. And for myself, I love them as if they were my keiki. So I'm just as strict as I would be with my keiki. Of course, there's certain guidelines that I can't cross, but my expectations and my love is the same. That's my own little personal thing. But we have maybe about 2 minutes for each of you to share. How do you approach disciplining keiki that aren't yours, whether they're your niece, your nephew, your student, a kid in your kid's class that is out of line? How do you approach those types of things? I really want to start with Kalehua, because he is a po'okumu, he's a principal, and I know you do that a lot and you raise your own kids. So
right after his answer, then nobody need answer though.
I know, yeah. I'm like all encompassing.
It's really simple, because even in a classroom, I'm not a yeller. As a po'okumu, what has to be there first is aloha. So you gotta be walking around high-fiving and hugging and encouraging. But I know in my classrooms, and I've been blessed with wonderful students in the at all levels. But as a fifth grade teacher, um, I'm not afraid of waiting. Like I'm not going, and I would tell them, I'm not going to give you information, and I'm not going to help you until you help yourself. And helping yourself means be quiet. Helping yourself means you got to pay attention. And so as a teacher, uh, there's not much yelling, and it seemed to work okay. I think it helps that I'm 6'4" and 250 something pounds. So and tattoos all over. So that's kind of helpful for the little ones. But I mean, for myself, my license is elementary, and I really like teaching the young ones. And the young ones, most of what I experienced, and especially teaching in Anakuli, that many times they come with the heavy hand, and so you gotta give something different. You gotta balance out the way that they're experiencing the world. And so when they come in hard, you gotta come soft.
Mahalo, Kalehua. Woo, that was right to the point.
Me.
Maikai, Huali'i, you want to add to that? How do you take care of disciplining keiki that aren't your own biological children?
You have to build trust. You have to build trust. Like Kalehua said, you got to give a lot of aloha. You have to, I teach because I also have young children, babies that I take care of. It's kind of all the same when La'i and Moku and Hina come over, my nieces and nephews, they know, they know that I love them, and I love them hard. I love them. Every single child that I've ever taught or had in my possession, they are protected like I will protect my own, like my own children. But you have to build the trust for them to know that they can come to you. They can come to you with anything and talk to you about anything. Hina used to get scolded by her mom and dad, and she used to call me, and just get some insight. And so first and foremost, building trust, setting boundaries, and teaching them what my expectations are in my house and in my classroom. And it's nothing over, it's nothing unattainable. It's just, behave, listen, be respectful to myself, to yourself, and to everybody else. So it all begins with trust, though.
Mahalo, mahalo. I'm loving some of these comments too. I don't know if you guys had a chance to look at it. Maka, I love your comments. Trying to raise keiki in a controlled environment that you really desire can be really challenging at the same time when you have a multi-generational hale. And then also that there's great aspects of raising in that type of environment with multi-generations. And I can see how it can be really beneficial for some families. Myself personally, like, I didn't grow up in the most ideal household. So for me, having, my mother in the same household as me would probably not be the most ideal situation. And everybody's situation is different, right? But ideally, if I had this wonderful relationship that, with my mother, then it would have been a different situation. And that's just super personal that I'm sharing that with you. But, there was just a lot of mayhem and chaos growing up when it came to my mother and decisions that were made that affected me directly. So in that case, it was even more so. I think there were other factors, even the closest relatives. Some of them are just wonderful, and some of them are just I hate to use the word, but toxic, and have been toxic to me. And I didn't want that to filter into my children. But if the situation is ideal, that's ideal, right? To have grandma and grandpa, how he grew up, it's a beautiful thing. And I agree, Maka. Mahalo for sharing that. Takes a village to raise a keiki, for sure. So I think we have two more short comments that we can throw in. We have Shang and then Anohana. So Shang, you want to touch on the disciplinary disciplining other kids?
Yeah, I'll make it pretty brief. I think typically I'm pretty reserved. I don't really step out of place unless I really receive like Tiff said, the trust or the permission, I guess, from their makua to kind of step in and do that, you know, unless I know what I'm trying to give. But I think also to Kalehua's point, I think, you know, sometimes you can't really just step back, you know, giving that lesson, giving the nuku, giving the discipline is showing care and showing love for that person. And you can't just keep a you know, closed mouth sometimes. But I think for the most part, I'm very just kind of like wait and see, you know, until I get that permission, even like in a sports environment, you know, like I won't tell somebody to do something unless I got that credibility to tell them what to do, you know. You know, so same thing goes, you know, sometimes my lesson might not be what might not be in line with what the parent will want. So that's why I think it's a sensitive time too, you know. You can't really do things outside unless you get that kind of permission. So that's kind of what I wait for, I think.
Mahalo. Yeah. So I'm gonna have Hano close it up a little bit with, because you touched on the coaching thing, and I turned to him and I'm like, oh, you got to talk about that, you know, because he coaches a lot, you know, and that's a whole different ballgame when you're coaching
Yes.
other people's kids, right?
Yeah.
I think what I've learned from my wife, especially from my wife, and her fierce protection of our two children that came with her that aren't my biological, was that I needed to figure out a way to communicate to my son, especially, how I was feeling. If I was disappointed, if I was angry, I needed him to understand how I was feeling. And by telling him straight how I was feeling was more than enough. You know, lickings wasn't necessary because I was able to articulate myself, my emotions, my mindset, my thought process, and the situation. So he felt them. It's almost like Shane walking home for mom because you don't like disappoint him. And so because I started doing that for my son, I had to do that for my son. It became how I dealt with all kids, you know. And plus I had to deal with more kids, because I give a good example. I get my nephew, my sister's son. He had the hard hand, and my son never have. Right now, my nephew, I can't even get him to come around me because of that relationship we had. I only lick you because I needed you. I needed to. Your mother wanted me to lick you, or this and whatever. It never make us closer. So this way that I had to evolve to treat my kids. Luckily for everybody, even if they're not my kids, I treat them like that's
The
my
same.
kids.
Yeah.
That's my kids, right? Because I don't hit my kids. I don't have to. Because I can explain to them in the moment what happening, why you disappointing me, what's wrong, what you cannot do, what you should do, how you gonna say sorry, how you gonna make this right.
And I think coupled with that is also the demeanor, the voice, the eye contact.
Yeah.
There's like a whole package that comes along that makes it effective.
Like Kalehua's aura.
You know
what I mean? Like I thought the scariest thing I ever witnessed in my whole life was when my Uncle Clifford came up to me and just looked you right in the eye. Like, what you like do? He willing for do anything, you know, and I don't want to face that. I don't want and you know, and not even in licking, you just and if that's something, you know, sometimes it's like that's the look. That's my best weapon is like
silence.
And then pow, you know.
The
pukana, yeah. So again, yeah, like I don't hit kids at period. So I treat all kids the same, even just like mine.
Oh, that was a really good talk. Sorry, guys. It's 7:32. We covered everything I wanted to cover and then some. But I just wanted to stay on for 5 extra minutes if you guys are cool with that. If anyone has any nino or questions that you want to ask any of our panelists, please feel free to stay on. But other than that, I wish you all a beautiful aloha. He po malie no ho'i. What time is it now? It's 7:30.
And I'm sorry.
Have a beautiful ahi
for making you guys feel uncomfortable when it came to this. I never mean to do that. Maybe I don't want nothing wrong. I don't have a problem. You guys.
You said to give examples.
As a give example. Personal.
Mahalo. Bye, Maka. Thank you for coming.
Who get question? No more question.
Anybody get Nino? If not, no pressure. Lala, all these wonderful people that we care about. Mahalo. Bye bye no.
Thank you, Shay. Thank you, Tiff.
Noe.
Thank you, Kalehua.
All these great comments.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for including us and everybody who was here, to listen to everything. That was amazing. So thank you, Hano and Maile. You guys always blow my mind, bro. Always blow my mind. Every single conversation. And Kalehua for that matter too, We're now in the same car together.
So anybody who registered for tonight, you're gonna get in your email the recorded copy. So single parent of 5, 2 grandkids, best advice to keep calm. Yes, keep calm, have patience. Yes, I agree. Mahalo nui. Well, you guys have a beautiful evening. I think we don't have any need now. But ahui ho, malama.
How are you guys?
Okay.